Her first word was a whisper, a single, impossible syllable breathed into the steam-filled air of the Blackwood Manor laundry. It was the smallest of sounds, a ghost of a word, yet it struck the new laundry maid, Anna, with the force of a physical blow. She froze, her hands submerged in the scalding, heavy water of the washing tub. The rough linen sheet in her grasp went limp. All she could hear was the frantic, terrified thumping of her own heart against her ribs. The child, Lady Seraphina, stood beside her. A small porcelain figure in a pristine lace dress that seemed utterly out of place amongst the damp stone floors and the sour smell of wet wool. For 2 years, the Duke of Blackwood's daughter had not spoken, not since the fire, not since the night that had consumed the East Wing, her mother and her voice all at once. She was a ghost herself, a silent little wraith who drifted through the grand cold rooms of the manor, clutching a small crudely carved wooden bird in her tiny hand. The finest doctors from London had come and gone, shrugging their shoulders and murmuring about trauma of the mind, a malady no pill or tonic could remedy. She lived in a world of absolute silence, her wide, grey eyes the only testament to the thinking, feeling child trapped within. Until now, Seraphina's gaze was fixed on the sliver of soap Anna had been using, a bar of plain, unscented stuff worlds away from the perfumed French soaps used upstairs. The child's small finger lifted, pointing. "Blue," she whispered again, the sound as fragile as a moth's wing. Anna's breath hitched, her head swam. The steam from the tub felt like a suffocating fog, and for a moment she thought she would faint, her knees weak and trembling. Blue. The soap was a pale, streaky blue, but that was not what the child saw. Anna knew, with a certainty that was a cold, sharp pain in her chest, that Seraphina was not looking at the soap. She was remembering something else, a color, a memory, a song. The lullaby Anna had been humming under her breath moments before, a mindless habit from another life. A song about a little bluebird learning to fly. A song a mother once sang to her daughter in a sunlit nursery, a nursery that was now ash and memory. Anna, the laundry maid with the rough, red hands and the downcast eyes, was a lie. Her real name was Eleanor, and she was the child's mother, the Duchess of Blackwood, the woman who had supposedly perished in that very fire 2 years ago. Returning to Blackwood Manor had been the most dangerous gamble of her life. After 2 years of hiding, of living in poverty in a remote village, she had been consumed by a desperate, gnawing need to see her daughter. She had heard the whispers, carried by travelers and gossips, of the silent little girl left behind, the Duke's broken child. Her child. So Eleanor had died, and Anna was born. She had stained her skin, roughened her hands with lye, and practiced a deferential quietness that was the antithesis of the confident duchess she had once been. The loyal old housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, who had always looked at her with kind eyes, had hired her on the spot, perhaps sensing a desperation she mistook for a simple need for work. Now, standing in the humid depths of the manor, Anna looked at the child, her child, and felt the fragile foundations of her desperate plan begin to crack. She had wanted only to be near Seraphina, to watch her from a distance, to assure herself she was safe. She had never, in her wildest dreams, imagined this. "Blue," Seraphina said a third time, her voice a fraction stronger. She looked up, her clear grey eyes, her father's eyes, meeting Anna's for the first time. There was no recognition, only a flicker of curiosity, a question. Anna's throat was tight, a knot of unshed tears. She forced her hands to move, to continue their work, her knuckles raw against the coarse fabric. She could not break. She could not give herself away, not yet, not when she still did not know who had tried to murder her and her daughter that night. "It is a pretty color, my lady," Anna managed to say, her voice raspy and low, a stranger's voice. But the word was out, a bird released from a cage, and it was already flying, up through the stone corridors of the great house, destined for the ears of the one man she feared and yearned for in equal measure, her husband, the Duke, the man who thought her dead. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, was a man carved from grief. For 2 years, he had existed in a monochrome world. The vibrant colors of his life had been burned away in the fire, leaving only the grey ash of duty and the black despair of loss. He oversaw his estates, he sat in the House of Lords, he ate the flavorless meals served to him in the cavernous dining room, but he did not live. His heart resided in the nursery, with his silent daughter. He spent hours there, sitting in a chair by the window, watching her play with her dolls, her face a perfect blank mask. He would read to her, his voice a low monotone, filling the silence with words she never acknowledged. He would show her the wooden bird he had carved for her in the hazy, happy days before the fire. running his thumb over the crude blue paint he himself had applied. She would take it, her small hand closing around it, but her eyes would remain distant, lost. He blamed himself. He had been in London that night, summoned on some pointless political matter. He had left them. He had left Eleanor and Seraphina alone, and a stray ember, a faulty flue, some random act of fate had stolen everything from him. His wife's body had never been recovered. The intensity of the blaze leaving behind nothing but scorched stone and the horrifying certainty of her death. But Seraphina had been found by a stable hand in the gardens, covered in soot, physically unharmed, but silenced by the horror she had witnessed. When the news reached him, he did not rage, he did not weep, he simply broke. A fine, clean break straight through his soul. His cousin, Marcus Thorne, had been a pillar of support, managing the grim details, shielding Alistair from the worst of it. Marcus was always there, a steady, somber presence in the house, his quiet sympathy a constant balm. The summons came in the late afternoon. A footman, his face pale with excitement, found the Duke in his study, staring sightlessly at a ledger of accounts. "Your Grace," the man stammered, "it is Lady Seraphina." Alistair was on his feet in an instant, a cold dread washing over him. "What is it? Is she ill?" "No, Your Grace. She spoke." The words did not compute. They were a language he no longer understood. "She what?" "She spoke a word, Your Grace. The governess sent for you immediately. She is in the nursery." Alistair moved, his long legs covering the ground, to the grand staircase in a rush. He took the steps two at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic, unfamiliar emotion. It felt like hope, and the sensation was so foreign it was painful. He burst into the nursery, his chest heaving. The governess, Miss Albright, a woman whose expression had been fixed in a state of weary pity for 2 years, was beaming, her face alight. Seraphina was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her toys. She looked no different, the same placid, empty expression. "What happened?" Alistair demanded, his voice rough. "It was just a moment ago, Your Grace," Miss Albright explained, her words tumbling out. "We were walking back from the gardens. We passed the laundry, and she just said it. One of the new maids was there. The child pointed at something and said the word blue." Alistair knelt before his daughter, his hands trembling. He picked up the wooden bird from the floor. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick. "Fina, darling, look at me. Can you say it again? For Papa? Blue? Can you say blue?" Seraphina looked at the bird. She looked at her father's desperate, pleading face. Her expression did not change. Her lips remained sealed. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more profound than before. The flicker of hope in Alistair's chest died, leaving a familiar, aching cold. He slumped, the bird feeling heavy in his hand. "She will not say it again." It was not a question. It was a statement of defeat. "But she did, Your Grace," Miss Albright insisted. "I heard it with my own ears. A new laundry maid, Anna, she heard it too. It was unmistakable." A laundry maid, Anna. The name meant nothing to him, a servant, a stranger. Why would his daughter, who had been silent for 2 years in the presence of her father, her governess, her doctors, speak her first word to a laundry maid? It made no sense. Unless... A new thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierced the fog of his grief. It was not random. Nothing about that night had ever felt truly random. The way the fire had been contained so perfectly to the east wing, the way the stable hand had found Seraphina so far from the nursery, as if she had been carried. The forged letter from Eleanor they had found in her jewelry box, a cruel, stilted note speaking of unhappiness, a note Alistair had refused to believe but had been forced to accept. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her. Her silence was not empty. He saw that now. It was a shield, a fortress, and someone had just found a crack in the walls. "This laundry maid," he said slowly, his voice hardening. "Bring her to me." Eleanor stood before him in the Duke's grand study, a room she knew as well as her own reflection. The scent of old leather, beeswax, and his specific cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, filled her senses, a ghostly assault. It took every ounce of her will not to crumble. She kept her eyes downcast, fixed on the intricate pattern of the Turkish carpet, her hands clasped tightly before her to still their shaking. He was circling her. She could feel it. The soft tread of his boots on the rug, the sheer weight of his presence in the room. He was a predator, and she was the small, cornered animal. "You are Anna," he stated. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by grief. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Yes, Your Grace," she whispered, pitching her voice low and submissive. Miss Albright tells me my daughter spoke to you today. Yes, Your Grace. Just one word. Blue. Yes, Your Grace. He stopped in front of her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She risked a glance upward through her eyelashes. He looked ravaged, thinner than she remembered, with new lines of pain etched around his eyes and mouth. The sight of him was a fresh wound. She had to steel herself against the wave of love and sorrow that threatened to overwhelm her. Why? He asked, the word sharp. Why you? She has not spoken to me. Her own father, in 2 years. She has not spoken to anyone. What did you do? Eleanor's mind raced. She needed to be careful. A simple, plausible lie. I did nothing, Your Grace. I was just working, humming a little perhaps. She was with her governess. She just spoke. Humming? He seized on the word. What were you humming? Her heart leaped into her throat. The lullaby. She could not tell him the lullaby. It was theirs. A secret between mother and child. To admit to it would be to admit everything. Just a nonsense tune, Your Grace. I do not even recall it. The lie felt clumsy on her tongue. He was silent for a long moment. She could feel his gaze on her, intense and analytical. He was no fool. He was a powerful, intelligent man, and for the first time in 2 years, he was awake. The sleeping giant of his intellect was stirring, roused by a single, impossible word. You have a burn scar, he said, his voice suddenly soft. On your hand. She instinctively tried to hide her left hand, but it was too late. He had already seen it, a small, puckered mark on the back of her hand, near the wrist, a souvenir from the fire, from a falling, flaming piece of tapestry. A kitchen accident, Your Grace, from my last post. And where was your last post? He pressed, relentless. A small inn, Your Grace, in Oak Haven. She had rehearsed this backstory until it was second nature. A widow with no family, seeking honest work. He stepped closer, so close she could smell the faint scent of rain on his coat. He gently took her hand. His touch was electric. A jolt of pure, agonizing memory shot up her arm. She flinched, pulling her hand back as if burned anew. Forgive me, he said, though his eyes never left her face. They were narrowed, searching. You seem familiar. Have we met? I do not believe so, Your Grace, she breathed, her control fraying. I am a simple woman. I would not have occasion to meet a duke. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for a long, agonizing moment. At her face, deliberately smudged with a bit of soot. At her hair, ruthlessly scraped back into a severe bun. At her eyes, which she desperately tried to keep blank and servile. She saw the flicker of a question in his gaze, a phantom of recognition so faint he dismissed it almost as soon as it formed. He was looking for his wife, a duchess. A radiant, confident woman draped in silk and jewels. He could not see her in the haggard, weary laundry maid standing before him. The disguise was holding, for now. He seemed to come to a decision. He stepped back, the intensity of his presence receding. My daughter has been in a prison of silence for 2 years. Today you found a key. I do not know how, but you did. I want you to continue. Eleanor's head snapped up. Your Grace? You are no longer a laundry maid, he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. From this moment, you are assigned to the nursery. You will be Lady Seraphina's personal attendant. You will spend your days with her, talk to her, hum to her, do whatever it was you did today. Your only duty is to make her speak again. Do you understand? It was a trap. It was a gift. It was a terrifying, brilliant opportunity. To be with her daughter every day, to be under his roof, under his watchful eye. The danger was immense. But the reward was Seraphina. Yes, Your Grace, she said, her voice barely audible. Good, he said, turning away from her, a gesture of dismissal. Mrs. Gable will arrange your new quarters. You may go. Eleanor curtsied, her body moving with an ingrained grace she had tried so hard to forget. She backed out of the room, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, she leaned against it, her legs finally giving way. She slid down to the floor, gasping for air. She had done it. She was in. But as she sat there in the silent, gilded corridor, a chilling thought struck her. She was not the only one playing a game. Alistair had not promoted a laundry maid. He had captured a mystery. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the Duke of Blackwood would not rest until he had solved it. The days that followed were a strange, tense ballet. Eleanor, now Anna, moved into a small plain room in the servants' wing, a world away from the ducal chambers she once occupied. Her new life was centered entirely around the nursery. She woke with Seraphina, ate her simple meals with Seraphina, and spent every waking moment by her side. Miss Albright, the governess, watched her with a mixture of professional jealousy and grudging respect. The other servants whispered, baffled by the sudden, unprecedented promotion of a lowly laundry maid. Eleanor ignored them all. Her focus was a laser beam pointed at the small, silent child who was her entire world. She did not push, she simply existed. She talked to Seraphina in a low, constant murmur as they walked in the gardens, telling her the names of the flowers, stories of the squirrels chasing each other up the ancient oaks. She sang, not the lullaby, that was too dangerous, but other simple folk songs she had learned during her 2 years in hiding, and she watched Alistair. He was a constant, brooding presence. He would appear in the nursery doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his grey eyes fixed on them. He never stayed long. He would ask a few perfunctory questions, his gaze lingering on Eleanor's face, searching, always searching. She could feel him trying to place her, to solve the puzzle of her. One afternoon, as she was helping Seraphina build a tower of wooden blocks, he entered, holding a small, velvet-wrapped object. "A gift," he said, his voice quiet. He knelt, offering it to Seraphina. The child looked at it, then at him, her expression unchanging. Eleanor's heart ached for him, for the constant, hopeful rejection he faced. "It is a music box, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "Your mother, she loved music boxes." Eleanor's breath caught. He opened it. A tiny, tinny melody filled the room, a tune from a popular opera. It was a lovely gift. Expensive and thoughtful. It was also completely wrong. Eleanor had hated that particular opera. She had found the tune shrill and irritating. It was her cousin Beatrice who had adored it. A small detail, a meaningless error, but to Eleanor it was a glaring mistake, a sign of how little he had truly seen her, even when she was by his side. Seraphina showed no interest. She turned back to her blocks. Alistair's face fell, the light in his eyes dimming. He closed the music box, the silence rushing back in. His gaze lifted and met Eleanor's. In that moment, she saw not a duke, but a broken man, lost and adrift. A flicker of her old love, fierce and protective, surged through her. She had to look away, lest her eyes betray her. Later that week, the real breakthrough came. Eleanor was brushing Seraphina's long, silk-fine hair before bed. The room was quiet, lit only by a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. She was humming again, the forbidden lullaby. It had slipped out, a half-conscious comfort. "Sing," a tiny voice said from the chair. Eleanor's hand stilled, the silver-backed brush hovering over Seraphina's head. She held her breath. "Sing it," Seraphina repeated, her voice clearer this time. She turned, her grey eyes locking with Eleanor's. And for the first time, Eleanor saw it. A flicker of memory, a glimmer of recognition, not of Anna the maid, but of Mama. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, hot and unstoppable. She sank to her knees in front of her daughter. "Oh, my darling," she whispered, her voice choked with 2 years of unshed grief and love. She began to sing, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. The simple song about the little bluebird flying home to its nest. Seraphina listened, her expression rapt. Her small hand came up and rested on Eleanor's cheek. Her touch was hesitant, questioning. "Mama," she whispered, the word a fragile miracle. The world shattered. Eleanor's carefully constructed walls of deception, of survival, of fear, crumbled into dust. She pulled her daughter into her arms, burying her face in her hair, and sobbed. She held her tight, this living, breathing piece of her own soul, and wept for the years they had lost, for the horror that had separated them, for the joy of this impossible reunion. She did not hear the nursery door creak open. She did not sense the presence in the doorway until a floorboard groaned under a heavy weight. She looked up, her vision blurred with tears. Alistair stood there. He was white as a sheet, his face a mask of utter, stunned disbelief. His eyes were not on Seraphina. They were fixed on Eleanor's face, on the tears streaming down her cheeks, on the raw, undisguised love in her expression. And he knew. In that instant, the disguise of Anna the laundry maid burned away like mist in the sun. He was not looking at a servant. He was looking at the ghost of his wife. "Eleanor," he breathed, the name a ragged prayer, a sound of pure shock. The air in the room became thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She slowly, Gently set Serafina down, her movements stiff with dread. The child, sensing the sudden, terrible tension, shrank back, clutching her wooden bird. "You," Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He took a step into the room, then another. He looked from her face to her hands to the way she held herself. He was seeing it all now, the familiar curve of her jaw, the way she tilted her head. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both monstrous and miraculous. "It is you. It cannot be." Eleanor rose to her feet, her chin lifting with a spark of the old defiance she thought had been extinguished forever. Alistair, his name on her lips, spoken in her true voice, was the final confirmation. He staggered back a step, his hand coming up to brace himself against the doorframe. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen, spectral. "But you died," he whispered, his mind reeling. "The fire. There was nothing left. We searched." "You searched for a body," she said, her voice cold, laced with the bitterness of 2 years of lonely terror. "You found what you were meant to find. Nothing." "Meant to find?" he repeated, his confusion warring with the shock. "What are you talking about? It was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident." A harsh, brittle laugh escaped her. "An accident? Do you really believe that, Alistair? Or is it just easier than contemplating the alternative?" She saw the anger kindle in his eyes, hot and swift. "What alternative? That I am a fool? That my entire household is incompetent? What are you accusing me of?" "I am accusing you of nothing," she shot back, her voice rising. "Because you were not there. You were in London, debating some bill about canals while your home burned and your family was left to die." The accusation struck him like a physical blow. The color flooded back into his face, a dark, furious red. "That is unfair. I was summoned by the party whip. It was my duty." "And what about your duty to us?" she cried, the words tearing from her throat, raw and painful. "To me, to your daughter? A fire does not start by itself in a locked wing of a house, Alistair. Someone said it. Someone wanted us dead." He stared at her, the full, horrifying weight of her words finally sinking in. The pieces he had refused to examine began to swirl in his mind. The convenient location of the fire, the stable hand's odd story of finding Serafina not in her bed but by the garden gate. The letter, he breathed. "The note you left." "I left no note," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I would never have left you. I would never have left my child. That letter was a lie, planted to make you believe I was unhappy, to make you accept my death without question." He sank into the chair by the window, the one he had spent so many empty hours in, his head in his hands. "No," he mumbled into his palms. "No. Who would do such a thing?" Eleanor watched him, her anger momentarily displaced by a cold, weary pity. He was so blind, so wrapped up in his world of politics and honor, that he could not see the vipers nested in his own home. "Think, Alistair," she urged, her voice softer now, but no less intense. "Who benefits the most from my death? From Serafina's death?" He looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. The answer was immediate, obvious, and utterly unthinkable. There was only one person who stood to inherit the Blackwood title and fortune if Alistair were left without a legitimate heir. One person who had been a constant, sympathetic presence since the fire. One person who had managed all the details, who had comforted him, who had become his shadow. "Marcus," Alistair whispered, the name tasting like poison. "My cousin." The sound of his name seemed to make the shadows in the room deepen. It was a truth so monstrous it felt profane to speak it aloud in the quiet sanctuary of the nursery. Eleanor simply nodded, her expression grim. "He was there that night. I saw him. In the corridor, just before the smoke became too thick. He was watching, a shadow in the shadows. He thought I hadn't seen him." Alistair's mind flashed back through 2 years of memories, now tainted and grotesque. Marcus's hand on his shoulder, offering comfort. Marcus's quiet advice to stop the search for Eleanor's remains, to let her rest. Marcus's subtle suggestions that perhaps Alistair should consider remarrying to secure the line. Every word, every gesture was now recast in a sinister, predatory light. He had been nurturing a serpent at his own hearth. "I was trapped," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she relived the nightmare. The smoke was everywhere. The door to the main hall was barred from the outside. I could hear the wood splintering, the roar of the flames. I grabbed Serafina from her bed. She was so small, so trusting. Her voice broke. She paused, drawing a ragged breath. There was no way out, but the nursery window, the ivy on the wall is thick, as old as the house. I knew I couldn't make it down with her, but there was a stable hand, Thomas, a young lad in the courtyard below. He was shouting. I dropped her. I prayed he would catch her, and he did. Alistair pictured it. His wife, his duchess, climbing out a window into a smoke-filled night, dropping their child into the arms of a boy, a desperate, impossible act of a mother's love. "And you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "How did you get out?" "I fell," she said simply. "The ivy tore from the wall. I landed in the shrubbery by the old well. My leg was broken. I must have hit my head. When I woke up, the wing was a furnace. I could hear the shouting, the bells. I knew Marcus would be looking for survivors, for bodies. He could not know I had lived. He could not know Serafina had lived. So I ran, or I crawled rather. I hid in the woods until dawn. Thomas found me. He gave me his wages. He pointed me toward the road to Oakhaven, and he swore he would never speak of it." Alistair rose from the chair, his movements stiff, his face a mask of cold fury. The grief that had defined him for 2 years was gone, burned away, and replaced by a rage so pure and so potent it was almost incandescent. He was no longer a broken man. He was a duke, and his house, his family, had been violated. He crossed the room and stood before her. He did not touch her. The distance between them was still a chasm, filled with 2 years of lies, pain, and his own unforgivable blindness. "He will pay for this," Alistair said, his voice lethally quiet. "I will strip him of his name, his honor, his freedom. I will see him rot in a prison cell for what he did to you, for what he did to our daughter." Eleanor looked at him, at the promise of vengeance in his eyes. It was what she had dreamed of for 2 years, but seeing it now, she felt a surprising emptiness. Justice would not give her back the time she had lost. It would not erase the terror of the fire or the hardship of her exile. "And what of us, Alistair?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw not just rage, but a deep, bottomless well of shame. He finally understood the true depth of his failure. It was not just that he had been absent, it was that he had been blind. He had not known his own wife, not truly. He had not seen the danger coiled in his own family. He had accepted the lies because it was easier than facing a more complicated, terrifying truth. "I failed you, Eleanor," he said, his voice raw. "In every way a man can fail his wife. I cannot ask for your forgiveness. It is not something I have the right to ask for, but I will earn your trust. If it is the last thing I do, I will earn it back." He turned without another word and strode from the room. Eleanor listened to his footsteps receding down the hall, firm and purposeful. The hunt had begun. She turned back to her daughter. Serafina had watched the entire exchange with wide, unblinking eyes. She was still clutching the little bluebird. Eleanor gently took her daughter's hand. "It is all right, my love," she whispered, pulling her into another embrace. "Papa is home now. He is finally home." Alistair did not sleep. He sent a rider to London for his solicitor, Mr. Finch, a man known for his discretion and his bulldog tenacity. Then he began his own quiet war. He did not confront Marcus immediately. Instead, he became a creature of observation. He watched his cousin at dinner, noting the man's easy confidence, the proprietary way he spoke of the estate's business, the subtle condescension in his tone when he addressed the staff. It was all there, clear as day, a pattern of arrogance Alistair had been too submerged in his own misery to see. He summoned the stable hand, Thomas, to his study. The young man arrived pale and terrified, convinced he was about to be dismissed for his role in the Duchess's escape. Alistair poured him a brandy, his hand steady. "Tell me everything you saw that night, Thomas," Alistair said, his voice calm. "And do not be afraid. You will not be punished. You will be rewarded for your courage and your loyalty." Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, Thomas told his story. He spoke of seeing Lord Marcus near the East Wing stables just an hour before the alarm was raised, of the strange acrid smell in the air. He described catching Serafina, a bundle of white lace falling from the darkness, and of finding the Duchess, injured and desperate, near the woods. Every word was a nail in Marcus's coffin. Meanwhile, a strange new dynamic settled over the nursery. Eleanor remained Anna to the rest of the household, a fiction that was becoming more transparent by the day. She was no longer a servant. She was a queen in exile, ruling over a tiny kingdom of one, and Alistair was her most devoted subject. He did not press her for affection or forgiveness. He simply served. He began to court her, not with grand gestures, but with small, quiet acts of penance. He would appear with a cup of tea, brewed exactly as she liked it, a detail he had never bothered to learn in their previous life together. He brought her a thick woolen shawl, remembering how she always felt the cold in the stone manor. He would sit on the floor with Serafina, patiently rebuilding the block towers the child knocked over, his presence a quiet, steady apology. One evening, he came to the nursery and found Eleanor by the window, staring out at the dusk-shrouded gardens. "Finch arrives on the morning coach," he said, standing a respectful distance away. "He has already begun making inquiries in London. It seems Marcus has been living well beyond his means for some time. Gambling debts, bad investments." Eleanor did not turn. "Motive is not proof." "No," Alistair agreed, "but it is a beginning. I also had Finch examine the letter, the one supposedly from you." He paused. "The forger was good, very good, but he made a mistake. He dotted the I with a small circle, a habit of the continent. You have never done that, but Marcus spent 2 years in Paris before he returned to England. A small, telling detail, another piece of the mosaic. He thought you were dead, Eleanor," Alistair said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "He underestimated you, we both did." She finally turned to face him. The lamplight softened the weary lines on her face, but it could not hide the deep, abiding sadness in her eyes. "I did what I had to do to survive, to protect my daughter." "I know." He took a tentative step closer. "I have been living in a ghost story for 2 years, Eleanor. Mourning a woman I am beginning to realize I barely knew. You were the Duchess of Blackwood, a beautiful ornament for my arm at social functions, the mother of my heir. But I never saw you, the strength, the fire, the woman who would climb out of a burning window to save her child." His honesty was disarming. This was a man stripped bare of his ducal arrogance, of his pride. This was just Alistair, the man she had once fallen in love with, before titles and duties had built a wall between them. "She is talking more," he said, changing the subject, his gaze shifting to the sleeping form of Serafina in her cot, in whispers. "But she is talking. To you." "She asks about the fire," Eleanor said quietly. "She has nightmares." "As do I," he admitted, his voice barely audible. The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm. For the first time, Eleanor felt a flicker of something other than anger and pain. It was a reluctant, cautious empathy. He had suffered too. In his own blind, ignorant way, he had suffered. The trap was set 3 days later. Mr. Finch had arrived, a small, bird-like man with eyes that missed nothing. He had spent 2 days poring over household accounts and discreetly interviewing staff. The final piece of evidence came from an unlikely source, a disgraced footman Marcus had dismissed a year ago. Finch found him working in a London tavern. For a hefty sum, the man was willing to talk. He had been paid by Marcus to bar the east wing corridor from the outside on the night of the fire. Alistair summoned Marcus to the study. He made sure Finch was present, seated in a shadowy corner, his notebook open. Eleanor insisted on being there as well. She stood by the fireplace, a silent, avenging angel in a simple grey dress. Marcus entered with his usual easy smile, a glass of brandy in his hand. "Alistair, you wish to see me? And Anna," he added, his gaze flicking to Eleanor with dismissive curiosity. "You seem to be everywhere these days." "Sit down, Marcus," Alistair said, his voice dangerously level. He remained standing behind his massive mahogany desk, his hands resting on its polished surface. Marcus's smile faltered slightly at the coldness in his cousin's tone. He sat, sprawling in the leather armchair opposite the desk. "Is something amiss?" "I have been reviewing the events of the fire," Alistair began, his voice calm, almost conversational. 2 years ago, a number of details have come to my attention that I had previously overlooked." Marcus stiffened. "Marcus." He sat up a little straighter. "It was a tragedy, Alistair. There is no sense in dwelling on it." "Oh, I think there is every sense," Alistair countered. "For instance, the source of the fire. The investigators said it was a faulty flue, but I have had a new report commissioned. They found traces of an accelerant. Turpentine, to be precise, the kind used to clean paintbrushes in the old studio." Marcus's face was losing its color. "A coincidence?" "Perhaps," Alistair continued, his voice like chipping ice. "And perhaps it was also a coincidence that the door to the corridor was barred from the outside. A footman, a man named Jones, has recently confessed to doing it. On your orders. Marcus shot to his feet. That is a lie, a fabrication from a disgruntled servant. Is it? Alistair's voice rose, the fury he had been holding in check finally breaking free. And is the letter a fabrication, the one you forged in my wife's hand, so clumsily dotting the I's in the French style you picked up while running from your creditors in Paris? Marcus stared, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. His eyes darted around the room, from Alistair's thunderous face to Finch's impassive stare, and finally to the woman by the fireplace. He looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her, and the last vestiges of his composure shattered. The recognition, the horror, the utter disbelief dawned on his face. You, he gasped, pointing a trembling finger. It cannot be. Hello, Marcus, Eleanor said, her voice clear and cold as a winter bell. The fight went out of him. He collapsed back into the chair, a broken, defeated man. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned cousin had been utterly demolished, revealing the greedy, murderous creature beneath. Why? Alistair demanded, his voice a roar. She was your family, the child. Serafina was your own blood. Marcus laughed, a terrible rattling sound. Blood? What is blood? I was the heir until you married her. I was next in line for all of this. He gestured wildly around the opulent room. And you brought her here, this nobody, and she gave you an heir, a daughter no less. She ruined everything. I was just taking back what was mine. The confession, so boldly stated, was sickening. Alistair walked around the desk until he was looming over his cousin. For a moment, Eleanor thought he would strike him. His hands were clenched into fists, his entire body shaking with rage. But he did not. You will not hang, Alistair said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. That would be a mercy. And it would bring scandal upon this house. No, Mr. Finch has arranged for your passage on a ship bound for Australia. You will leave tomorrow with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you ever set foot in England again, if you ever so much as write my name, the evidence of your crimes will be delivered to the authorities. You will live out your days in exile, a nobody, with nothing. You will have the life you intended for my wife. He turned his back on the trembling, ruined man. Get him out of my sight. Finch gestured to two burly footmen who had been waiting in the hall. They entered and hauled the unresisting Marcus to his feet, dragging him from the room. The door closed, and then profound silence fell. The battle was over. The enemy was vanquished. But the room was still filled with the ghosts of the past 2 years. Alistair turned to Eleanor. He looked exhausted, drained, but the cold fury in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, aching vulnerability. It is done, he said. Yes, she replied quietly. He took a step towards her, then another, until he stood before her. He slowly, hesitantly, reached out and touched the burn scar on her hand. His touch was feather-light, reverent. Can you ever forgive me, Eleanor? He asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. Not for what he did, but for what I did not do, for not seeing you, for not protecting you. She looked into his eyes, into the depths of his shame and his regret. The anger she had held onto for so long, the bitterness that had been her shield and her fuel, finally dissolved. It left behind a vast, quiet space, a space that could, perhaps, be filled again. She thought of the man who had brought her tea, the man who sat on the floor and played with their daughter, the man who had hunted down the truth not just for vengeance, but for her, for them. She did not answer him with words. Instead, she lifted her other hand and placed it over his. It was the first time she had willingly touched him in 2 years. A small gesture, a beginning. He let out a ragged breath, and his shoulders slumped in relief. He carefully lifted her hand, the one with the scar, to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to the puckered skin. It was not a kiss of passion, but of penance, an oath. That night, for the first time, he did not return to his lonely, cavernous bedroom. He came to the nursery and, without a word, took the small cot that had been set up for Anna and moved it to the foot of Serafina's bed. He then took a blanket and settled into the large armchair by the window, the one he had occupied as a grieving father. Eleanor watched him from her own small bed. He was not demanding his place back in her life or in her bed. He was simply taking up his post. A sentry, a guardian, standing watch over the family he had almost lost. She fell asleep to the sound of his quiet breathing, a steady, reassuring presence in the darkness. Weeks turned into a month. Marcus was gone, a bad memory fading into the past. The household slowly adjusted to the miraculous return of their Duchess. Eleanor shed the skin of Anna for good, but she did not immediately step back into her old life. The silks and jewels remained in their boxes. She preferred simple dresses, and she spent her days not in the drawing room, but with her daughter. Seraphina blossomed. Her whispers grew into sentences, her sentences into laughter. The grey, empty spaces in her eyes were filled with light and mischief. She was a child again. One afternoon, Eleanor found Alistair and Seraphina in the garden, on their hands and knees in the dirt, planting new rose bushes along the path. Alistair's fine coat was smudged with soil, and there was a streak of mud on his cheek. He was showing Seraphina how to pat the earth down around the roots. He looked up as Eleanor approached, and he smiled, a true, unburdened smile, one she had not seen in years. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "We are restoring the garden, Mama," Seraphina announced proudly, holding up her muddy hands. "Papa says the old ones were sad." "He is quite right," Eleanor said, her heart swelling. Later, as they walked back to the house, Seraphina running ahead to chase a butterfly, Alistair fell into step beside her. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about Oakhaven, about the people who live there. People like Thomas. They live hard lives. We have so much. I would like to help build a proper school, ensure the cottages are repaired." Eleanor stopped and looked at him. He was not the same man. The fire had burned away more than just a wing of his house. It had burned away his pride, his indifference. It had forged him into something better, someone better. "I think that is a wonderful idea, Alistair," she said softly. They stood there for a moment in the warm afternoon sun, the space between them no longer a chasm, but a comfortable, quiet understanding. The final piece of the old life was laid to rest one evening. Alistair came to her, holding the small, velvet-wrapped music box. "This was a mistake," he said, his expression chagrined. "I bought it because I remembered you humming the tune once. I realize now you were mocking it. It was Beatrice who loved it." He opened the box, and the tinny, irritating melody filled the air. With a small, wry smile, he walked to the open window and tossed it out into the shrubbery below. He turned back to her. "I want to learn your real song, Eleanor." And in the quiet of the nursery, with their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Eleanor finally sang him the lullaby of the little bluebird. She sang of its fear, its flight, and its final joyful return to the safety of its nest. He listened, his gaze full of a love and admiration that was deeper and more real than anything they had ever shared before. When she finished, he did not speak. He simply reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They stood together by the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens of their home. It was not an ending. It was a new beginning, built not on titles or duty, but on the hard, rocky, and fertile ground of earned forgiveness. The house was no longer a gilded cage. It was a home, and it was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of a family finally, truly made whole.